In the 1980s, the arcade scene was booming. Coin-ops were everywhere, with the likes of Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, and Pac-Man dominating shopping malls. By the mid-80s, most publishers such as Konami, Taito, and Capcom were pushing out arcade hits such as Contra, Bubble Bobble to 1943. Although steady, with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the mid-80s, the arcade scene was badly hit, with the likes of Super Mario Bros., Mega Man, and Castlevanias reaching homes, hampering the arcades. By the mid-90s, with home consoles slowly creeping up to technical advancements of arcade engines, the arcades was in decline. However, in 1991, Capcom would release Street Fighter II: The World Warrior, and within months not only did it bring relevance back to the arcades, but also came to revolutionise the gaming landscape. Hey guys, how's it going? Lap here. Today I'll be taking a look at a very important game of mine, Street Fighter II. As usual, I'll be taking a brief look at its production, story, gameplay, characters, and design. As it's pretty thin on plot, I'll be going through the many additions, as well as the legacy Street Fighter II would go and create within the fighting game genre. As always, the running soundtrack for these videos are my acoustic arrangement of the game's music. I release individual covers and look at both modern and retro games, so do subscribe to keep up the releases. So practice your Hadoukens and Shoryukens, and let's have a look at Street Fighter II and how it came to transform the fighting game genre. See, many of you probably don't know, but Street Fighter II is a very special game for me. Not only did it introduce me to games, but it actually made me the person I am today. As mentioned in previous episodes, I didn't have a home console growing up, so games was extra immersive when I had the chance to play them. I remember vividly going to my cousins weekly and being introduced with the SNES very early on. The game that mesmerised me was Street Fighter II. The whole visual and sound design blew me away. I was in awe of the characters and its fluid gameplay. It was also the first time I realised how compelling music was. This probably in some subconscious way led me to become a musician. Street Fighter became an obsession. Another memory was asking my uncle for a handful of change so I could play on hours on an arcade machine. So it brings me great joy to finally talk about the game that started it all for me. A game that brought hundreds and hundreds of hours of excitement into this kid's face. In the 80s, Capcom has already established themselves as a forerunner in the game industry, releasing many hits from the likes of the Mega Man series to Bionic Commando to Ghouls and Goblins. Street Fighter II was a follow-up to 1987's Street Fighter. Fighting games were still in its infancy. Although there were fighting games before, almost all of them were slow, stiff-moving and unbalanced, and Street Fighter was no exception. Street Fighter did gain moderate success, enough for Capcom to work on a sequel. However, Capcom originally wanted to change the direction of the game completely. With the craze at the time, Street Fighter II actually started out as a beat 'em up, with the working title Street Fighter 89. This concept would be scrapped as feedback for the promo was negative. Fans felt it was nothing like the original Street Fighter, leading Capcom to return back to the original genre. However, Street Fighter 89 would eventually become another Capcom hit, Final Fight. Both games share the same universe, with many Final Fight characters crossing over into the Street Fighter series. With plans back to making a fighting game, the team would bring back Ryu and Ken from the original game and contextualize on a World Martial Art Tournament event with characters deriving from different nationalities. The team wanted to target the issues within the first game and emphasize the goal of making the sequel balanced and fluid. Another focus was to make the game playable as a two-player versus mode. Ensuring balanced characters was vital, undergoing many hours of playtesting and reworks over the process. This gamble would ultimately pay off, as this two-player versus mode started a co-op craze, rejuvenating the arcade scene and revolutionising the fighting game trend of the 90s, with many developers wanting a slice of that pie. The general plot for Street Fighter II is based around a world fighting tournament, with the world's best fighters competing for personal reasons. But behind the tournament, organisers Shadow Lu schemes to lure the best fighters for malice intent. The original release offered 8 playable characters. The main protagonist of the game is Ryu, the winner of the previous competition. He enters this tournament for a chance to face off against other strong opponents. Ken, Ryu's best friend, training partner, and returnee from the first game. He enters the tournament to reignite his desire in competitive combat. E Honda, a sumo wrestler from Japan, enters to give exposure to the art of sumo. Chun-Li, an Interpol police from China, she would enter to track down the man responsible for her father's death. Blanca, a wild man from the jungles of Brazil, he joins the tournament to discover answers regarding his origins. Zangief, a wrestler and sambo practitioner from the Soviet Union, he participates for national pride. Guile, a former US Air Force major, he seeks Shadaloo for the murder of his best friend. Dalsim, a yoga master from India, he enters to win the cash prize to help his people with poverty. The players will eventually face the 4 members of Shadaloo. The first is Balrog, a former boxing heavyweight champion from the United States. He joins Shadaloo simply for money. The second is Vega, a Spanish bullfighter trained in the arts of ninjutsu, a vain man wanting to eliminate ugly competitors. The penultimate opponent is Sagat, the returning boss from the previous game. He returns to seek revenge on Ryu for scarring him. The leader is M. Bison. With the manipulation of psycho power, he aims for world domination. In Japan, with the exception of Sagat, the other 3 Shadaloo bosses' names are shuffled. Balrog is actually M. Bison as a clear nod to Mike Tyson, but to avoid a potential lawsuit, he was renamed Balrog in the Western market. Vega is known as Balrog, while M. Bison is called Vega. The reason why there isn't a straight swap between M. Bison and Balrog is because Vega doesn't sound like a name for a boxer, so they decided on Balrog instead, giving the bullfighter Vega as it sounds possible as a Spanish name, leaving M. Bison for the big bad. These 4 will become playable in the follow-up installment. Subsequent releases adds 4 additional characters. These are T-Hawk from Mexico, whose homeland has been taken by Shadaloo. Fei Lung, modelled off Bruce Lee, a movie star from Hong Kong. DJ, a Jamaican musician and kickboxer using the competition as a form of musical inspiration. And Cammy, a MI6 agent from England with past ties with Bison. The single player mode pits the player against a series of opponents before facing the 4 boss characters. After beating Bison, the player is rewarded with a short character ending. These could be lesson-filled themes such as Ryu's ending, to conventional happy conclusions such as Ken's wedding, to bizarre and strange ones such as Zangief dancing with Mikhail Gorbachev as a form of celebration. But the most drawing focus was the 2-player versus mode. Previously, games were based around teamwork or getting the high score, but Street Fighter 2 would pioneer the idea of facing off against each other. The over-the-top animation, smooth gameplay, competitive aspects makes this instantly attractive, bringing in many families and friends to do battle to claim bragging rights. The game uses a 6-button layout with 3 assigned for punch and 3 for kicks, all varying in strength and speed. Special commands were brought back from its predecessor. However, unlike the original, the command window was less strict, making it easier to access these special commands, allowing more players to use them more frequently. This also improved the general smoothness of the gameplay. The relaxed command window would accidentally lead to the creation of combos due to the time players have to chain command motions. The game would use bonus stages as a way to break up the pacing. These include breaking barrels to the now meme-worthy car-destroying stages. Due to feedback from fans, Capcom would produce many revisions to help further improve its gameplay and popularity. The original run would introduce 4 updated versions. Champion Edition, released in 1992, a year after, allows the player to play as the 4 boss characters previously not available. Option to play mirror characters is enabled, and characters are further adjusted for balancing reasons. Hyper Fighting was released later that year due to the many bootleg and knockoffs. One bootleg named Rainbow Edition offered a speeded up version of the game. Capcom would curb this by releasing Hyper Fighting. This would speed up the gameplay, give certain characters additional commands, and further refine the character balancing. Super Street Fighter 2, the new challenger, released in 1993, would introduce the 4 new characters. A new hardware was also used. This helped improve graphics and audio quality. The final revision of the original run was 1994's Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. New animations were used for the characters. Game speed can be manually selected. A super meter is introduced. When filled, allow the player to use a super command. But most significant was the introduction of Akuma, or Goki in Japanese regions, who was added into the game based on poor English translation, that led to the character's creation. Akuma would go on to become one of the most unforgiving opponents, if the player is worthy enough to face him. The rise of Street Fighter II in the early 90s was a sensation. Its impact was huge. It single-handedly started a boom for the fighting game genre. Every form of the media wanted a piece of Street Fighter. There were toy lines, animes, board games, to even the cartoon series. It was so popular it even led to the movie. But let's not talk about that. Within months after the arcade release, many home consoles were asking for a port of the game. With Capcom having a strong relationship with Nintendo, development for a SNES port started early on. However, due to the SNES's limitations, there had to be a reduction in animation frames, downgrading voice samples, and altered ending scenes. Nevertheless, even with the limitation, the port was a success, bringing a lot of joy to many SNES players, including myself, whom played majority of it via the console. Many versions of Street Fighter II was ported to multiple home consoles, from the likes of Sega Mega Drive, Atari ST, TurboGrafx PC Engine, Commodore 64, to even the Game Boy. Street Fighter II was so popular every game company wanted to recreate that success, all of them trying their luck on fighting games. From the likes of Mortal Kombat, Virtua Fighter, to copycats such as Data East's Fighter's History, which was so similar it led to a lawsuit. But one of the most prominent was the company SNK. During the 90s, SNK would produce many great fighting game series such as Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Samurai Showdown. But it would be their flagship, the King of Fighters series, that would set them aside as rivals to Capcom. The rivalry would lead both companies to create some of the greatest fighting games of all time, eventually leading to fan-favourite collaborations. Over the years, Street Fighter would continue their legacy, from the follow-up Alpha series to the gameplay perfect masterpiece Street Fighter III Third Strike, to the late 2000 fighter game resurrection of Street Fighter IV, to the modern esport regular Street Fighter V. All this from the humble 1991 release of Street Fighter II, The World Warrior. Alright, so the game has aged. Graphically, it doesn't hold up with the modern fluid and smooth looking fighters. However, there's something Street Fighter II has that most games don't: charm and longevity. Using groundbreaking big sprites, back in the day this was a big deal. Because of how much memory it would take to develop large sprites, it was rare, if not impossible to produce. The colourful design and over-the-top action was instantly captivating, something absolutely essential to reel in players. Using cultural themes for the characters, each one of them felt different. The concept was to play on stereotype, but add in exaggerated features or personality. This would make each character memorable and unique. To make the characters stand out, multiple artists were assigned for the design. They will be allocated 1 or 2 characters. This will make them focus on building up a unique and iconic character. However, with limited memory, a lot of work was needed to get a good balance between a detailed large sprite and fluid gameplay. Due to this, many aspects had to be cut, such as additional character actions. Character sprites were constantly modified to fit within a certain area to preserve space, but at the same time needed to look flashy. At the time, background art was more of an afterthought, and was left for entry-level designers. The main designers would generally spend their focus on other aspects of the game, such as the gameplay or level design. But Capcom wanted the game to look eye-catchy, especially in a loud and fluorescent arcade. Like the characters, it was vital for the stages to be just as attractive. Sticking with the over-the-top stereotypical themes, stages such as E Honda's Japanese bathhouse or Guile's American airbase are just as iconic as the characters themselves. The overall design process was so vital for the aesthetic of the game that over half of the production budget went to the art design. But this gamble paid off, as its iconic design paved the way for many imitators, and even today it's used as a blueprint for many fighting game developers. The music for Street Fighter II is just as renowned as the designs. Tracks such as Ken and Ryu's theme has become gaming soundtrack staples, while some, such as Guile's theme, are so popular it has become a cultural meme. If you know, you know. Similar to the visuals, the music needed to stand out within loud and bustling arcades. So the music was composed to be short, repetitive, catchy, and most importantly, memorable. Sticking with cultural guidelines, national musical flairs were used for the characters, with the likes of Chun-Li's theme having an oriental feel, or Vega's theme having a flamenco style. Generally, the character themes were fast, frantic, and energetic, giving the player a sense of excitement. To add to the intensity of the gameplay, the theme's tempo are sped up when one of the characters is at low health, adding in an extra element of danger. A lot of the tracks were really fast paced, some parts were incredibly hard to recreate. Fast melody lines were used to build up energy and to hook in the players, to give a sentiment of vigour and celerity. A good example is part of Zangief's theme. Another technique used are arpeggiated sweep melodies. These uses a broad cluster of notes, creating a flourishing ascension feeling before resolving onto a definitive section. A good example is Kami's theme. Phrasing and repeated motifs are essential for making a melody memorable. These are used so that it gets stuck in the listener's head. These can be simple, but the way it's spaced instantly make the motifs distinctive. These can be heard in the opening to Guile's or Blanca's theme. See, for me the Street Fighter II soundtrack was highly significant. As stated earlier, it was the first form of music I openly paid attention to. Without this soundtrack, or specifically Guile's theme, I probably wouldn't have interest in gaming music, and probably wouldn't have started this channel. So it brought me great joy in arranging acoustic takes on the soundtrack. There were so many fantastic pieces I wanted to do, but had to limit myself with the selected few. I may be biased, but for me it's a timeless classic. Not only did it fulfill its task of enhancing the gameplay, but the music has become just as revered as the other aspects of the game. Without a doubt, if Street Fighter II was not the triumph it was, there would not be a fighting game community as of now. The game transformed the gaming landscape, ushering a wave of fantastic fighting games. All of them, to a certain point, owe a debt to the creation of Street Fighter II. The design and gameplay was cutting edge at the time. The competitive versus mode started a fad no one expected. All of the characters are as distinguished now as they were at the peak of its success. The music is instantly recognisable. Not only did this become a success as a product, it started a new gaming trend. It was a household name on all counts of media, and every form of merchandise was made for it. Street Fighter II's impact can still be felt today. The fighting game community is massive. Street Fighter as a series is considered by many as the biggest fighting game franchise in the world. For a game that's about to reach its 30th anniversary, the game still holds up wonderfully. Yes, it's not as fluid and fast-paced as most modern gamers, but its gameplay, design and music still resonates, giving that certain charm and nostalgia that will never truly fade away. Would you play on hours on end? For most of us, probably not. But those bursts of versus mode or playthrough on single player mode will certainly bring a smile to your face, and that's what Street Fighter II essentially is, an ageless joyride. Thank you for watching an episode of A Look At. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did making it. Each video takes a lot of time, research and arrangement to make, so please do give this video a like and share. Give this channel a subscribe, little things like this helps my channel grow and let me continue working on these videos. Leave any comments and suggestions below, let me know if you like it or not. If you dislike it, let me know why, so I could try to fix it for the next release. And until next time, take care.